liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir. Reading you loud and clear.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Discovery, roger, there, Brahma.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and welcome to the May 22nd, 2019 edition of Space News. This is Peter Auld, and once again, got the full team together. We've got Tina Stagg, Michael Abdullah, and Angela de Gretsche here from the Space Association of Australia. And we're going to swing straight over to Tina.
Thanks, Peter, and good evening, space fans. In US space policy news, the White House will seek an additional $1.6 billion for NASA in fiscal year 2020 as a down payment for a 2024 human lunar landing. The budget amendment, announced early last week, would include $1 billion to start work on lunar landers and $651 million to accelerate work on SLS and Orion, with smaller amounts for technology development work and lunar science. The budget would also cut the proposed budget for the Lunar Gateway by more than $300 million, focusing it on the minimal design needed for supporting that 2024 landing. NASA officials said other agency programs would not be cut to cover the increase, although the White House will reportedly seek to offset the increased NASA funding by cuts to the Pell Grant educational program for college students experiencing financial difficulty. NASA is still working on an estimate of the overall cost of the 2024 landing initiative, but officials acknowledged they would need larger increases in later years. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said the $1.6 billion in additional funding requested is at the low end of what's needed for the 2024 lunar landing goal. He later said he didn't think the budget request was dead on arrival in Congress and would win bipartisan support. However, the plan by the White House to offset the increase by cutting Pell Grant funding is drawing opposition. Meanwhile, two key House members said they have reservations about the proposed funding increase for NASA's 2024 lunar landing plans. In a statement, Democrat Representatives Eddie Bernice Johnson from Texas and Kendra Horn from Oklahoma, who are chairs of the full House Science Committee and its Space Subcommittee respectively, said they needed more information about how NASA plans to return to the moon and its total cost before deciding if they would support the additional $1.6 billion sought for the agency in 2020 for this purpose. The two also said they opposed the White House's proposal to pay for the increase by taking surplus funds from the Pell Grant program. Later in the week, House appropriators released a spending bill that increases funding for NASA but largely ignores a budget amendment that sought a bigger increase. The Commerce, Justice and Science Appropriations Bill includes $22.32 billion for NASA for fiscal year 2020, nearly $1.3 billion more than the administration originally requested. The bill, though, provides little in the way of increases to exploration programs, with much of the additional funding going to the agency's science programs. Neither the bill itself nor a statement by the House Appropriations Committee mentions the budget amendment released earlier in the week that sought $1.6 billion in additional funding to support the agency's 2024 lunar landing goal. Moon news. NASA announced awards last week to 11 companies for initial studies and prototype development of lunar lander concepts. The awards, part of the Next Step program for exploration technology development, have a total value of $45.5 million, with each company required to contribute at least 20% of the total cost of each project. The 11 companies selected represent a broad cross-section of the commercial space industry, from established aerospace companies to emerging startups. The companies are Aerojet Rocketdyne, Blue Origin, Boeing, Dynetics, Lockheed Martin, Maston Space Systems, Maxar Technologies, formerly SSL, Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems, Orbit Beyond, Sierra Nevada Corporation and SpaceX. The 6-month efforts focus on descent stages, transfer vehicle and refueling elements of lunar landing systems. As previously reported here on Space News, NASA plans to issue a separate solicitation this northern summer for development of integrated lunar lander systems. Meanwhile, NASA has found a ride for a demonstration of an inflatable heat shield. NASA and United Launch Alliance said recently they're now planning to fly the Lofted technology demonstrator as a secondary payload on the Atlas V launch of NOAA's JPSS-2 weather satellite in late 2021 or early 2022. NOAA agreed to allow Lofted on its launch after concluding it posed no significant risk to the mission. Lofted will deploy an aeroshell 6 metres in diameter, testing a technology that could be used on future Mars missions. ULA is also interested in the technology for recovering engines from future launches of its Vulcan rocket. And over to Peter.
All right, we're going to look at the NASA Commercial Crew Program. It seems that developing parachutes for commercial crew vehicles has become a major challenge, and so has figuring out what constitutes an anomaly during testing. Recently, Boeing released a video of the latest parachute test of its CST-100 Starliner spacecraft, just 2 days after NASA revealed at a congressional hearing that there had been a problem during the test of SpaceX's Crew Dragon parachutes last month. For its part, Boeing said its most recent test in February was a success, as had been all previous tests. However, issues with Boeing's parachute tests had been raised at earlier meetings of an independent safety advisory panel. Boeing said while there had been minor problems during some previous tests, they had not prevented the tests from being successfully completed. Well, it doesn't seem to really inspire confidence, so I'm not sure what's going on over there. It sounds like a bit of spin doctor work. Angelo, what's happening in planetary news?
Work continues to correct a problem with one of the main instruments on NASA's InSight Mars lander. The Heat Flow and Physical Properties probe, provided by the German space agency DLR, features a mole designed to hammer into the surface to a depth of up to 5 metres to measure heat flow from the planet's interior. However, the mole has been stuck at a depth of about 30 centimetres since early March. The instrument team thinks that a lack of friction with surrounding regolith, which has more cohesion than expected, is keeping the mole from penetrating. Engineers are looking at ways to increase the friction to allow the mole to go deeper. Officials said the instrument is otherwise operating well. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has detected the crash site of Israel's Beresheet lander. An image of the site taken by LRO 11 days after last month's crash landing shows a dark smudge surrounded by a pattern of lighter material not visible in an image of the same region taken in 2016. The images don't show a crater, which means either the crater is too small to be seen or because the impact did not create one given the spacecraft's low angle of approach and small size. Meanwhile, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter has completed 60,000 orbits around the Red Planet. The spacecraft hit the milestone last week, more than 13 years after arriving at Mars. MRO's main mission is to provide high-resolution images of the planet, but also serves as a communications relay for spacecraft on the surface. Over to Michael.
Thanks, Angelo. And turning to European news. The European Space Agency has agreed to fund development of a prototype of a next-generation upper stage for the Ariane 6. ESA awarded contracts this week to the Ariane Group and MT Aerospace to develop prototype of a highly optimised black upper stage, or Phobos, an upper stage made of lightweight carbon composite materials. Phobos could lead to development of a new upper stage for the Ariane 6 called Icarus, intended to increase the rocket's payload capacity. Icarus could be ready by the mid-2020s if fully funded at the ESA ministerial meeting later this year. And turning to Japan. Japan's Hayabusa 2 spacecraft aborted a manoeuvre last week to drop a target marker in a crater on the asteroid Ryugu. The spacecraft was descending towards a crater that it created with an explosive device last month, but automatically aborted the descent at an altitude of 50 metres without dropping the marker. The cause of the aborted manoeuvre wasn't reported. The marker is intended to help the spacecraft target the crater in a later manoeuvre where it will descend to the surface to collect material excavated by that explosion. Okay, back to you, Angelo.
Back to the USA and SpaceX. SpaceX postponed last week's scheduled launch of 60 Starlink satellites because of a technical issue. The company postponed the launch more than 2 hours before the scheduled liftoff time because it wanted to update satellite software and triple-check everything again. The next launch opportunity is not until later this week, the company announced. The 60 satellites on the rocket are the beginning of a constellation of thousands that will provide broadband internet access globally. Despite the delay to the launch of the first set of Starlink satellites, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk provided new details about the company's plans. In a call with reporters last week, Musk said SpaceX views 1,000 satellites as the point when Starlink becomes economically viable. Limited services could begin with as little as 420 satellites or 7 launches, with 12 Starlink launches enough to ensure coverage of the United States. Musk said each launch will deploy a terabit of usable capacity, far more than existing geostationary satellites. The Starlink satellites will communicate with ground terminals the size of a small to medium pizza, using phased array antennas, but he did not disclose the cost of those terminals. In more SpaceX news, SpaceX is building a second Starship prototype, this one on the US East Coast. Recent images show that a second prototype of the company's next-generation launch vehicle is under construction on Florida's Space Coast. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk confirmed on Twitter that the company is doing simultaneously competing builds of Starship prototypes in Florida and Texas. At the Texas site, SpaceX is preparing for another round of testing of the Starship hopper with closure notices for the road leading to the site posted for May the 28th to the 30th. So we look forward to seeing that. Back to Mike.
Thanks, Angelo. Let's look at some other commercial space news. Space IL has secured a $1 million prize to support work on a second lunar lander. The Genesis Prize Foundation provided the funds to support initial work on Beresheet 2, a follow-up of the Beresheet lander that crashed while attempting to land on the moon last month. Backers of the project announced shortly after the failed landing they would try again, although they have not disclosed details on the mission or its projected costs. Peter, over to you.
Virgin Galactic announced recently that it will move Spaceship to operations to New Mexico this summer, ahead of the final flight tests and commercial service of the suborbital spacecraft. The company is wrapping up work outfitting the interior of its facility at Spaceport America and expanding its offices in nearby Las Cruces. Virgin Galactic, which last flew Spaceship 2 in February, said it will finish up the flight test program for the vehicle at Spaceport America, but didn't give a date on when it planned to begin commercial flights. And finally tonight, NASA names new moon landing program Artemis after Apollo's sister. Half a century after NASA sent men to the moon under the Project Apollo, the space agency is now working to land men, and women this time, on the lunar surface as part of its Artemis program. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine revealed the new name last week during a call with reporters that was primarily focused on the budget for the newly named moon program. It turns out that Apollo had a twin sister, Artemis, and she happens to be the goddess of the moon, said Bridenstine, referring to Greek mythology. Our astronaut office is very diverse and highly qualified, and so I think it's very beautiful that 50 years after Apollo, the Artemis program will carry the next man and the first woman to the moon. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you, everybody, and it's Back to you, Andrew.